confirm?
Okay. Yes, I believe we are. I wanted to welcome everyone. We have a great lineup today on this great topic of digital divide, and many of us working towards digital equity for our Latinx community, particularly during these times that we're just saying is so important and so essential for to have connectivity and to be able to not only have it but use it to the way we live, work, and learn. So the great lineup is of course with our the new appointment of the FCC Chairwoman that has really led for many years, and now with this new leadership role. I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to do the welcome and begin the session. Please, David. He's on mute.
That helps, right? Thank you again. That was just a rehearsal. I'm David Cruz. I'm Communications Director for the League of United Latin American Citizens. It is a sincere honor for us to welcome you to this very, very timely and important conversation. We have many distinguished visitors and guests who are going to address us today. And to do them justice would eat up all our time. So rather than do that, I would like to ask you, the attendees and those who are in the audience, to read their bios online. They're very influential. They've got great impact in this space of broadband technology. Let me please welcome our esteemed new FCC Chairwoman who is with us today, Jessica Rosenworcel. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Also, we want to welcome our esteemed National Chief Executive Officer of the League of United Latin American Citizens, Sindy Benavides.
David, muchísimas gracias. Thank you for hosting this and moderating.
Absolutely. You know, as I read through some of the data, the enormous investment that is going to be made, the backdrop, of course, is this pandemic that America has faced, as the world has. So, Madam Chair, as we come out of this, what do you see ahead in terms of what you've witnessed, first of all, during the pandemic? What did it highlight for you?
Well, it highlighted for me that the digital divide in the United States is very real and it's very big. And we have got to solve it. We have to embrace what I call the 100% policy. 100% of our households need to be connected to fast, reliable, and affordable high-speed broadband. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you live, or where you came from. We're not going to make economic and civic progress in the United States if we don't find a way to reach everyone everywhere. That was something that was clear to me before the pandemic, but sometimes I had to sell people in Washington on that vision. But after the last year and a half, it's no longer difficult. I think that everyone understands the importance of solving the digital divide and embracing digital equity now across the board.
Thank you for that opening overview of what we have endured and seen. As both the husband of an educator and the father of an educator, I can tell you that we witnessed many a day when students were unable to join, or their connection was bad, or they had to turn off their cameras so that we could just hear them. So tell me, specifically related to the Hispanic or the Latino community, were there some specific challenges there that you've identified and where you could be of help to us?
Absolutely. So let's start with what you just described. Like, this pandemic started, we shut down schools, we sent kids home, we told them to go online for class. But what happens if you're in a household that doesn't have internet access? You're locked out of the virtual classroom. And the students who are locked out of the virtual classroom, well, they were disproportionately rural, low income, and Latinx. We have got to solve this problem. I used to say that there were all these students who had internet access at school, but they didn't have it at home, so they couldn't do their nightly homework. I called it a homework gap, but that homework gap during this pandemic became a learning chasm. And this is not just about those individual students, this is about all of us, because our collective success depends on getting every one of those students connected, every one of those students capable of remote learning, every one of those students capable of being able to do the homework that requires internet access. We don't need them standing outside of the McDonald's or the Taco Bell trying to pick up the free Wi-Fi signal just to go to class. I just think in the United States of America, we can do better by every student, no matter who they are, no matter who their parents are. So I am proud that the FCC has been able to make progress on this. We have been able to support now millions of students and millions of connections with a new program we call the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And we're making available laptops, Wi-Fi hotspots, routers, modems through the schools to the students. The way I see it is we used to talk about no child left behind. The way I want to see it is no child left offline. And that is going to be something that I want the FCC to continue to work on. I just believe we should figure out a way to solve the homework gap once and for all, and it's within our power to do it.
Madam Chair, if I could, I would have given you a standing ovation there, because I think that America's Latino communities and so many others would certainly affirm everything you've said. Well, Sindy Benavides, you as National CEO of LULAC, you're no stranger to this space. You have devoted a lot of your work and attention, as has our staff, to this area. How do you see it from the LULAC perspective when it comes to broadband access to the internet?
Well, David, thank you for that question. And first and foremost, congratulations to our chairwoman of the FCC, to Jessica Rosenworcel. We're thrilled to have her in this leadership role because we know that one, she is a friend of the community, she's a friend of LULAC, and she's no stranger to our LULAC members. As we think of this really important issue, David, it's important to understand that COVID-19 revealed what we already knew in the community. And that is that the absence of internet connectivity is a barrier to access information, resources, and opportunities. What a lot of individuals don't know is that 1 in 3 Latinos do not have access to technology and broadband. And I just want us to think and stop up and really think about that for a minute, how this disproportionately impacts Latinos. Before the pandemic, there was an article on the Hill that cited that Latinos are least likely of all demographic groups to have a home internet or even access to a computer. So to give you an example, in Chimayo, a rural community in North Central New Mexico, Hispanics make up more than 90% of the population, yet as of 2018, only 41.8% had broadband access. And to make progress in closing the gap, a Harvard Business Research team in July of 2021 estimated that it would take at least $175 to $240 billion to close that divide. So we know that that investment needs to be made now. As I think of our Latino community, David, I think of all the work that we have been doing throughout this pandemic, including financial relief. And I just remember one of the stories that one of our council members piped up to the national office, and that in one of those relief efforts, a mother of 3 children was facing that day the decision of being able to purchase beans, tortillas, and cooking oil, or purchase laundry detergent. And so broadband access, purchasing broadband was not even on the table, was not even an option for them. And so as we think of, one, the work ahead, and obviously so excited to see the leadership of Chairwoman Rosenworcel at the FCC, we know that we will be closing this digital divide. We certainly don't want our children to be left off the grid. And we know that long-term, this impacts our economy. So making sure that Latinos have access to internet is just simply logic. It's making sure that all of our Americans are able to have an opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sindy, for that overview and the story that you shared from New Mexico. When we look at tackling issues like this that are transformative in our society, there are 2 parts, of course, the mechanics, the logistics, the infrastructure. But Sindy, you and I both know there's also the outreach and engagement with the community. Talk to me about the partnership that you are embarking on with Heartland Forward, and what that means and how that's going to be so key and pivotal to our progress.
We are thrilled, excited to be working with Heartland Forward, and just a shout out to Angie as well as Abby and the entire Heartland team for all their hard work and making this really a reality. For us, it's really working together to help boost outreach in the Latino community and get more eligible households connected with affordable internet services so that they can participate in learning and healthcare and work, commerce. And as a mother of young children, I have the benefit of being able to do telehealth. But let's think about how many in our Latino community, simply for not having access to technology, are not able to do this from the comfort of their homes. And so through the heart of LULAC, which is our councils, and here a shout out to Caroline, to Luis, who are all LULAC members leading our committees, leading LULAC councils. And you know what a lot of people don't know, David, is it is our LULAC members and our councils who are the heart of this organization. And so it's really leveraging our heart, it's leveraging our councils and that trust that LULAC has had for 92 years, because we live and work in over 35 states and local communities, Washington, DC and Puerto Rico, and making sure that we're reaching our members where they live, where they work, to not only build that awareness around EBB, but also enroll in the emergency broadband benefit. And so through this partnership with Heartland Forward, Heartland will be providing $50,000 to LULAC to go directly to local outreach and enrollment. We're going to be focusing specifically in Arkansas, Illinois, Ohio, and Tennessee, and expanding into other states. But we are thrilled that we get to do this work, because it's not only reaching the community, but in fact, it's also building that awareness with our own members and making sure that we are increasing enrollment into EBB.
Thank you very much, Cindy. You know, that's a perfect segue. And if I may, just personal point of privilege, Ms. Cooper, your team in prepping for today, such an outstanding job they have done. They've made it easy to keep us on this freeway. So thank you, and thank them for their support. Madam Chair, if I could turn to you again, and I want to add my congratulations. I see your passion. I spent a lot of time listening and watching some of your previous presentations. You walk the walk, and thank you. De parte nuestra, estamos muy agradecidos. We're very grateful for your leadership. So let me ask you, how can LULAC councils around America and Puerto Rico be part of this effort with Heartland Forward?
Oh, well, I thought you'd never ask. No, seriously, first, claps all around for what Heartland is doing with LULAC. Because earlier this year, the FCC started something new with the help of Congress, and Cindy just mentioned it. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. Sometimes we call it EBB. It's the nation's largest ever broadband affordability program, and it helps low-income households get online and get broadband service. We've got more than 7 million enrolled right now. And I'll tell you this, we got 7 million enrolled, not because I've done a video every day or preached about it from Washington. I mean, as compelling as I could be. We got those people enrolled because we worked with organizations that are trusted in the communities they serve. And what I have learned from this effort is that when we reach out to trusted individuals, they can get the word out. And that is the absolutely vital component here of solving the digital divide that doesn't get enough attention. Just creating a program in Washington is not enough. We're going to need lots of individuals out there and trusted forces to join force and make this happen. And I think what LULAC is doing with Heartland Forward is a really big part of that. You know your communities, you know how to reach people where they live, and you can tell them what this program can do for them. And it's not, like Cindy mentioned, just what it does in the short term, which is help households get online for school, for work, for healthcare. It's that we're going to make them digital citizens so they can fully participate in our culture and our economy. And we are going to turn those households from just being digital consumers into digital creators. And that's going to be important for our collective future. And this is just the start.
Well, that partly answers the question that I wanted to close with, but that's okay. That was a great preview. There is so much, of course, that the Federal Communications Commission is in charge of and responsible for. And these are challenging times. So let me ask you what we can expect looking forward. What will be maybe the top 2 or 3 priorities that we can close with? And know this, LULAC will stand with you in support of your efforts.
I want us in the United States to adopt a 100% policy. 100% of our households should have access to electricity, clean water, and fast and reliable broadband that they can afford. I think our civic and economic life going forward would be benefited by that. And we have to commit to it right here, right now. I know the FCC wants to be a part of making that happen. And I know we're going to have to work with folks who are out in the field like LULAC and Heartland Forward to really make sure that we get the word out and we find ways to connect every household, everyone, everywhere. That's my primary goal. And it's one that I hope to continue to work with all of you on in the future.
Madam Chair, Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel, thank you so much again for your generous time and insights that you've shared today. Also, I want to thank our Chief Executive Officer, Sindy Benavides. And now what I would like to do as we transition, I want to go into the area of education because, you know, it's really part and parcel of this entire paradigm that we're discussing today. And to do that, I want to invite now Luis Chavez. He is chair of LULAC's National Education Committee to take it from here. Luis, it's over to you.
Thank you, David. And what a wonderful way to start and set the platform for this conversation, to listening to the FCC Chairwoman, and as well as you trying to put this context all together for us, because we have a great lineup that is now before us. And so I'm going to do just very briefly some small introductions. And so then we'll be able to get into some good questions for our panel. So very excited to be here. And thank you, FCC Chairwoman, and also Sindy Benavides for the wonderful information and the context that you gave us and set out for us to do. This sets it up nicely for this group that is coming on next. So let me start with Angie Cooper. She is the Chief Program Officer for Heartland Forward. Thank you for being here. Heartland Forward is a research and action organization focused on economic success in the middle United States. And being from California, we have a middle here in California. It's called Central Valley. So it has some of the same features that some of our communities are suffering from and challenges that they have. Carolyn Sanchez Crozier is entrepreneur, chair of the LULAC's new National Innovation and Tech Committee, co-host of today's summit. Thank you, Carolyn. The longtime head of very active LULAC Council in Chicago area, and lead and host for the summit, as I mentioned. And we also have Francella Ochillo, Executive Director of Next Century Cities, which works with community leaders across the country as they seek to ensure that all have access to fast, affordable, and reliable internet, as was stated by the FCC Chairwoman. It's an important goal to have. And lastly on our panel, we have Matt Schmit, Head of Illinois' Office of Broadband. Great to have you here, where he oversees the Governor Pritzker's $420 million Connect Illinois program. Happy to have all of you here today. Thank you for making time to join us and for the audience to listen in and to have this conversation with you. So Angie, let's start with you. Heartland Forward mission focuses on supporting economic success. How do you come to get involved? How did you come to get involved in issues around high-speed internet access? And what have you learned so far?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And we are just thrilled to be working with LULAC and our other partners that we're talking to today, Next Century Cities and Matt from the state of Illinois. This issue is going to take continued partnership and communication, as the chairwoman said. So we're thrilled to be partnering with LULAC and extending some of our efforts across the heartland to make sure more people get signed up for EBB. But to your question, why did we get started? So Heartland Forward, we call ourselves a policy think and do tank. And we are focused on, one, how do we help change the narrative about the middle of the country and kickstart economic growth? You mentioned California, though, because we're strong believers that the middle of the country needs the coast just as much as the coast need the middle of the country. So there's many of these things that we're doing that could be spread across the heartland and across the country. But as an organization with the mission of kickstarting economic growth in the middle of the country, the chairwoman mentioned it herself. This is an economic issue. This impacts how we get our health care. This impacts how we search for a job, train for a job, do a job. We obviously know it impacted education, but we know our students, they're not just learning in the classroom anymore, they're learning at home, and that will continue, you know, pre-post COVID as well. And it really, you know, it's the 21st century and we've got to be able to compete, and for all of our communities to have access to high-speed internet is so very important for our communities and our economy. So that's why Heartland Forward got involved in the issue and this is a big challenge. Yes, we have, historic funding that has flowed into communities, but we have to help states like Illinois and others build the capacity and have public-private partnerships like this, so we can get those historic dollars in and right back out to the communities in an accelerated way. So like I said, we're just so honored to be working with LULAC and other partners as we expand information to get those eligible households connected across the heartland.
Thank you, Angie. And that's actually a good way to segue, working with community, working with partners. And Caroline, you certainly represent that in this panel. You helped initiate this connection with Heartland, closely following that process as it was developing and bringing Heartland Forward and LULAC together to promote internet affordability and internet access. What have you learned as the head of the local council in particular, and maybe just expanding overall, have you learned through this process of trying to balance this partnership building? How will that help shape your work as the new chair of the National Innovations and Tech Committee?
Well, thank you, Luis, for introducing me. I want to start by thanking all of the panelists and the speakers and Sindy, who many do not know of LULAC, all the intricacies of LULAC. Yes, we're at the national with her as our leader. We're at the state level with Maggie Rivera in Illinois. And we are at the local grassroots level. And I think it's unique for LULAC, for an organization, to have all these different facets. And yes, with LULAC, things happen in the field, out in the trenches, in the community, grassroots, with all walks of life, people that have technology, don't have technology, they're professionals, they're homemakers. And so we all wear many hats. And for me, LULAC is part of who I am. I was the first to go to college. And LULAC helped me navigate through applications when I was 15, and I never forgot that. So being an entrepreneur for 30-some years, I've also been an activist and an advocate for equity. I've seen the inequities. I'm an immigrant. I've seen what some have and some don't. And now with technology, it's even, and with the pandemic especially, it's even more critical that it's based on zip codes, that it's based on things that should not matter. I mean, it's a civil rights issue that we're all fighting for. And that's why it's at the hands of LULAC, from Sindy CEO at the table with the FCC to leaders like ourselves. And our council is now 20 years in focusing on education and digital equity. That's what our council is about. How this became an issue, because as an entrepreneur working with schools, of supporting them with infrastructure is in my work. I see how the pandemic really hurt us. We already knew that there were gaps, but this exacerbated those gaps. So we need to really be very vocal, very active, and we can't do it alone. So as a council, yes, I started working in Illinois. I ended up attending all kinds of Zooms, not everything's via Zoom. I met Schmit in one of those. I met Abby from Heartland Forward around the alliances. Matt is phenomenal at building those alliances. The state can't do alone. LULAC can't do alone. Our council can't do it alone. So as a result, we built those alliances, make connections, because digital divide means adoption, means devices, means use, means training, support, tech workforce. All those things need to be looked at. And our experts and professional volunteers, in our case, come together to help, to really support this movement. We call it a movement. So we do have grants that are available. The FCC's funding for subsidies for families. There are funds for schools for interconnectivity. There are funds for nonprofits like ourselves. And sometimes, we play a unique role in the outreach, in the awareness, in the training. So we do have a grant with another hat that I wear as a founder of Latinx Digital Leaders Now. And fortunately, we were granted a small grant from Matt Schmit, who means a lot to us. So what we do is work with other councils. There are thousands of councils across the country. And this grant that is made available thanks to Heartland Forward, we're going to make it work, because we've been doing this now for many years. And now through this new campaign to get more connections, more affordability, we can't do it alone. So our councils, and to the thread and the connections of all of our councils, we're going to be assisting, work with Heartland very closely with national. And there's data available, but we're going to look at metrics. We have pointed out the village of Summit in Illinois, where Benton Institute helped us, provided by the grant, really very, very granular detail of which blocks have the connectivity, which buildings, is it commercial, is it residential? Those are the things that we would not be able to know. In our councils, without that data, they won't know the impact or the lack of, and that's our job, is to be there as a support. So that's really what I'm here to say, is that we're very excited for this new launch, the new partnership, and every grant and every partnership really adds to the movement that we're embarking right now.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. What a great example and demonstration of building back better, right? Building back better together. And those partnerships are crucial for that funding. Let's shift over a little bit over to the government and how government is playing a role in all this. So Matt, can you share a little bit about the role that states can play in closing the digital equity divide, and what in particular is Illinois' approach?
Well, thanks so much, Luis, and Caroline. It's great to see you and the rest of the panelists today. And certainly the hallmark here in Illinois is that the Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly investing $420 million in our Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program. And so historically, funding has been the limiting factor for building out broadband, particularly when it comes to access and infrastructure. But what we're really keen on here in Illinois is making sure that we take a holistic approach to broadband and recognize that access and infrastructure certainly are limiting factors, but also our adoption and affordability and just the digital literacy tools and know-how to use what you have when you have it. And so that holistic approach is what we've charted a course for ourselves here in Illinois. Of course, that Connect Illinois program, $420 million. It was nation leading before this huge infusion of federal dollars. And so now we're in a position where we're seeing states around the Midwest and the country have hundreds of millions of dollars or more to invest in broadband infrastructure and access. And so in addition to that grant program, the program that Caroline referenced, our Illinois Connected Communities program, is really focused on engaging folks at the community level through 50+ hours of expert consultation and best practice curriculum to help a representative cross-section of the community identify a vision for its future and make that vision a reality. And as I'd mentioned, funding used to be the limiting factor, and now funding really isn't the trouble. It's putting together that vision, galvanizing the local resources and know-how, and making that vision a reality. And so that local planning, capacity building is something that we're really interested in engaging on. And just quickly, some of the other work that we're focused on, working with our higher education institutions and other anchor institutions, looking at broadband data and best practices and the integration of our programming at the regional level. We have an Office of Broadband location in Chicago and Springfield, but we know it's critically important that we're active in every region, in every county, in every community of the state. And so that Broadband Ready program, regional engagement for adoption and digital equity, is really important to us. And so is integrating our statewide computer equity network, basically collecting used computers, refurbishing them, and redistributing them on an equitable basis throughout the state. And so I'll say more about the key partners that we have to make all this possible, but PCs for People, Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, the University of Illinois, and other higher education institutions, and not to mention, of course, Heartland Forward. It's a team effort that's making this happen.
Sorry, thank you, Matt, for that great sharing out of what's happening in Illinois, is an example of what a state can be doing in positive ways, and also at the same time shifting when you need to because of what's happening in a larger context and taking advantage of it at the same time. Let's move to our final speaker, and I want to ask the audience, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We may be able to have a little bit of time to get to them, but if not, we'd love to get your questions because this is such an important topic where we're trying to figure out how do we connect families and individuals to the heart line of online, to getting their own progression in their own lives and their families forward. So Francella, can you share with us, you work with leaders, local leaders across the country to expand access to high internet speed connections and so forth, and broadband concluded. What should be the priority here? And in particular, what is possible for our communities if we all get residents connected and individuals and families?
Well, thank you so much for hosting this conversation. As you mentioned, my name is Francella Ochillo, and I am Executive Director for Next Century Cities. And I also spend part of my time as a research, well, essentially a fellow at Harvard University. And I work entirely on making sure people understand what is broadband, how do we make sure we address the digital divide, what is digital equity, how do we bring it to our community. I think 3 things that I just want to share. Number one, in my capacity leading Next Century Cities, when we work with state and local leaders, our goal is entirely about empowering them to determine what do they want for their broadband future. I want them to be able to say, we want to engage in federal policy, we want to engage in state policy, we need to do better at the local level, and we stand in the gap as a support system for them. So sometimes that's providing resources, sometimes that's being a thought partner to show them other opportunities to learn from their peer governments, and other times it means making room for them at the table in spaces where they were simply not invited. Secondly, I do want to double down on something that Matt brought up that we don't talk about often enough. Very often advocates, not just broadband advocates, spend all of our time on defense. Very rarely do we actually outline a proactive vision for what do you want for your broadband future. We spend a lot of time trying to plug holes, saying about where are their divides, these people don't have enough. Very often, especially in the Latinx community, we know that 1/3 of Latinx households are experiencing some part of the digital divide, whether it's affordability issues, not having a computer device. Things that people also don't think about is very often if you have a non-English speaking parent, very often who left a country where maybe they didn't trust government, maybe they don't want tools of surveillance and technology in their home. So it might be an actual decision that has to be unraveled. And sometimes we don't always have the right messengers to make sure that people know how can this actually empower them to do other things. And then finally, when we're thinking about the digital divide in general, I think one thing I never want us to miss is that when we are working on plugging digital divides today, that is an investment in next year and next decade and years to come, because we are building the digital infrastructure that we're going to be stuck with for decades. And so when we decide at the beginning that there are millions of people who are locked out, and let that become someone else's problem, we are only planting seeds that will have exponential roots that are harder to diagnose later. It will be harder to untangle that, because if we know that right now that we have millions of people who cannot get broadband, even if it's in their neighborhood, across the threshold of their front door, those are the same people who are working for economic justice, who don't have the same opportunities to age in place, who don't have the same opportunities to participate in shaping our democracy. So for me, when we talk about this as being a civil rights issue, sometimes the digital rights issue of our time, one thing that always sticks with me, it was an interview I did with one person's family, and the gentleman told me, I don't want my son to have to work with his hands. Very simply. And I walk around with that all the time, because we all have to have our why for why we do this work, and whatever's that story that keeps you going. But I think all the time about the people who are connected are going to have exponential opportunities that pale, like literally the people who are locked out will be leagues behind. They will be the people who are stuck in a goods and services model. Maybe they may have hourly jobs. Maybe if you're lucky, you get a 20-hour job, $1 an hour job with Amazon, which actually keeps you within $10,000 of the poverty line. So I want to make sure people understand those numbers. So the thing is, while people who are connected have limitless opportunities, the people who are not connected are always going to be at a disadvantage. And so when I think about the import of our work and what we need to do here, it goes beyond about connecting people to the nuts and bolts, the wires, the computing device, but is about ensuring that every single person in this country, regardless of their US citizen status, has digital citizenship, so that they can not only participate in a digital economy, but actually contribute to it and benefit from it.
I love that. Digital citizenship. I think that belongs somewhere big.
I will share my upcoming paper with you.
Yes, I'd love to read that. Well, we have one more round of questions, but I'm gonna try to intersperse questions that may be coming up from our audience. So let me try to do that next with you, Matt. Our question to you next was going to be around what outside partners you're working with, but maybe we can connect that to one of the questions that I read in the chat, and that was, who are you working with to refurbish the computers and so forth?
Yeah, we have a statewide ambition, of course, to refurbish computers and redistribute them on an equitable basis in every county of the state. And in order to do that, it's going to be an all hands on deck approach. So any nonprofit that meets standards, we want to work with you. But PCs for People, which is operating in, I think, 6 or 7 states around the country and growing, received a philanthropic grant, not related to our office, but it brought them into Illinois at the height of the pandemic. And so they've been able to set up regional hubs in Metro East, so East St. Louis region, and then also suburban Cook County. And so we're thrilled that we've got a national leader on the computer refurbishing front, PCs for People, working with us. If folks have any questions, we certainly point to them on our website, and they're very active throughout the state. Can't say enough about that partnership.
Great, thank you, Matt. I'm going to jump over to Angie to ask you our second round question. Can you talk a little bit about new collaboration, the new collaboration, and expound on it a little bit, because you already mentioned it and it's been talked about here and there, but maybe you can encapsulate it again for us. The partnership between Heartland Forward and LULAC to get the word out about the emergency broadband benefit and what people can do, what action can they do now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the collaboration with LULAC and the contribution of $50,000 that we're providing to get the information out about the emergency broadband benefit program is building upon something that we started. We ran what you would call true grassroots campaign over the summer months, so June through September, in partnership with the FCC to ensure that eligible households were getting the information they needed on one, are they eligible? And then 2, the process to get them signed up. So we worked both media and earned, paid and earned media. We put billboards up with information. We put flyers out. We trained over 500 librarians because we know libraries are still kind of the central network and hub for so many communities. And that's where a lot of students and families and individuals are going to get internet in communities across the heartland. We work closely with our state broadband offices to ensure that they had what they needed. And we created a toolkit. So the information was in English and Spanish, and we shared across. So we're building upon what we started this summer and ensuring that we get that information to the Latinx community in partnership with LULAC. And I want to hit on a few things that have been said today. I mean, we talk about collaboration, and there has to be a ground game on this because, as mentioned earlier, there is a lack of trust sometimes in almost every community of, I'm not sure who my service provider is. I don't really understand, how much the service is going to be and why did my service provider change. So we really need to have a ground game to build that trust and transparency around the affordability piece, because we know that affordability is one of the biggest barriers. But when you're educating people on emergency broadband benefit, you also then have the opportunity to educate them on digital skills are real. And it's not just in rural communities, it's in urban communities. It's not in one community versus another. So we also have layered on sort of that digital skills and education because it is confusing. And we also, when we look at sort of the affordability piece, we want to make sure that states and communities have the right resources. And so from a research perspective, Heartland Forward's looking at what is that barrier of what is affordable for internet service? Should there be some sort of guide for community leaders to determine, okay, I want this to be transparent to my communities of how much they're paying. And we got to think for the future. So today it might be 5G, or it might be fiber, or it might be Starlink, or it might be, but I mean, we don't want to look in 5 to 10 years and say, oh my gosh, we have another digital divide because we haven't kept up with the technology and we haven't kept the right people engaged. So I can't state it enough. It's not one of us that's going to solve this. It's all of us working together. And while we all are on a lot of calls and Zoom virtual events like this, like we have to keep this going because we can't work in silos. So again, that's one of the reasons we decided at Heartland Forward to partner with LULAC and you've heard all the numbers and the data of where and why it's lacking. And so we're just really looking forward to putting the resources and action on the ground, and who better to do that with LULAC and your ground game.
Great. Thank you for that, Angie. And talking about action and what needs to happen, I'm going to turn back to you, Francella, to talk a little bit about what organizations, LULAC and others, what role can they play in helping us get to that better future that you spoke of that's been the topic of this conversation?
Well, I think that one thing is, I don't want us to psych ourselves out into thinking that this is more complicated than it is. I think that every single person who is in this ecosystem, whether you are a private company, whether you are consultants, a nonprofit organization, a teacher who cares, a concerned citizen who goes to town hall meetings and wants your local officials to do more, everybody has something that they can do to contribute to moving this goal forward. I think that we need to start with doing some resource assessments to find out not only what financial resources that you have, but also what other human resources do you have within your reach? One of the most beautiful things that came out of a digital equity program in Matt's home state of Illinois, I remember we were talking to Chicago advocates who worked on food security. They got a digital equity grant. And one of the most important things that she said to me, she said, "We don't have any money, but we have love." So they literally went to every single small business on a street to make sure that they were able to actually process financial payments via computer, because most of those businesses operated with cash, and they needed to convert during COVID. And I think that it's really important to start wherever you are. Start with people that you love. And so the thing is, your part might be supporting digital literacy so that people know how to use the computing devices that they borrow from school or maybe have. Maybe your part is about education and making sure that we're not just talking to the students in those classrooms, but involving their families in that ongoing conversation. To Angie's point about the digital divide that stands before us, I think that we would be remiss to think that the digital divide, if we solve these gaps, that we're done. This digital divide is going to reinvent itself and manifest itself in lots of different ways. And so the thing is, we need to tackle the digital divide in front of us right now, but we also need to prepare for ongoing benchmarks of what you need to know to be able to operate in a digital society. Because if you think about just as simply as your phone, what it took for you to operate your iPhone 5 generations ago is very different than your iPhone 12. So the thing is, we need to be able to meet those ongoing benchmarks holistically, not just with a device distribution plan, not just with you get a subscription for 2 months and nobody has a plan for what happens on the day after that subscription expires, but holistically. So I think that just wherever you are, starting with thinking about what do I have available, and also making sure that you never think your voice is too small. Because I think some of the best parts about working with local officials is to find out that within the absence of federal support, when they weren't able to reach state officers, they started in their own communities with whatever they had within arm's length.
Thank you. One of our audience members said, "Preach on, Francella." That's great. I love it. I think there's another paper in the making there. Digital Love, I think, is another one that's coming. So thank you for that. How wonderful input and ideas and passion that you're giving us. Thank you. Carolyn, let me turn to you for this next question. What can LULAC councils do to improve digital equity in their own communities? And I do have a comment in the chat that I wanted to lift up, but please, you share first.
Well, as I said before, councils are made up of volunteers from all walks of life. So we all need to look at our councils within our own experts and our own volunteers, and then our connections to our community, our school districts, our libraries, our park districts. And we do have a very unique opportunity is our LULAC brand for trust. I know that, we don't easily trust others that come into our homes and, open up into our whatever we have in our digital online, whether banking or, other immigration related data. So we need those trusted partners. So LULAC councils can be that. And in our unique case of our council, we have many tech experts. So we talk about access, we also have to look at use and tech workforce. So we're initiating conversations with our own alliances with LatinxDLN to bring in a Cisco-Net Academy to get more tech credentials, to increase the tech workforce, to ensure that those dollars and those pay raises and those tech careers expand. So each council has to connect, has to look within their community's needs, and has to then help each other so that brand, the trust that LULAC has can really help move this along.
Thank you, Caroline. I did want to mention there was an ask in our chat space there. One of our wonderful partners, LULAC in Ohio, Professor Alicia Pagan, mentions the work that she's doing in middle school. Could you believe that, with STEM and young girls in STEAM? And she's asking for resources if we can provide any. So anyone can maybe jump in on this one. Ideas and resources for STEM careers and technology. To share with their LULAC Ohio STEAM Monarch leaders. So anyone have ideas to share with Alicia? And resources.
I think that there's various organizations that are looking at just that. How do we train a workforce to prepare for solving for the digital divide? So there are some organizations, I think, that are doing it well. Some community colleges are looking into it. So I'm happy to follow back up with more information, but I think that is kind of the next conversation. We haven't talked enough about how do we prepare a workforce. You know, a lot of states have dollars. They're going to continue to get additional dollars. They're going to be competing against the same workforce. And so if we want to make sure we have people that can execute and put the dollars to work to put the infrastructure in, we have to have the students and the individuals that have that expertise. So then the states aren't competing against each other, because we know what that happens as we're talking about affordability today. They're competing against workforce, the service, it becomes less and less affordable. So I know many of us are thinking about that, and how do we move forward, and who are the right trainers and educators to really make that happen in various communities.
And if I could just chime in,
yes.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, Luis, but just I wanted to chime in because I wanted to just drop a stat in the chat. I think whenever you find resistance from people who don't believe in your cause, you have to show up with data, right? And so I want to make sure that people saw the Deutsche Report. This is actually among several banks that are actually looking at what does it cost us for people to be locked out of certain opportunities in terms of our GDP and other aggregate impact. When you look at the Deutsche Report, that made it very, very plain that when we look specifically, I want to claim this in the space, that 62% of Hispanics could get shut out or be underprepared for 86% of the jobs in 2045. Wow. That is not that far away. So the thing is, when we need to actually bring people into our cause, instead of arguing the humanity, which I wish people would do things that it's the right thing to do, but we need to start digging in on the numbers on why does it matter. And as long as that many people are locked out, it is going to cost everyone something collectively. So I want to be clear that just when we say, oh, approximately 20 million households don't have access, that's like saying 20 million people have dirty water. Because it's not just the house that has dirty water that pays the cost. It's every single person that they touch, every single school they contaminate, every single network that they actually increase the cost. There is a collective cost when we lock this many people out. So I always say, go back to the numbers and focus on your why, because the why that brought you into this work is the thing that you have to find comfort in. And then you turn to the numbers to bring in people who deny you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to end with that wonderful last comment: data, evidence, information to back up your advocacy. Thank you all for a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Sindy, for your leadership and your being here with us. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. We're going to go on to the next session. Thank you, and keep joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.